All right. Well, our speaker tonight, Steve. How do you pronounce your last name?
It's harangue.
Harang.
Yep.
Okay. Steve Harang is our speaker tonight. He's a technical program manager with over 10 years experience working with SaaS companies in the San Francisco Bay Area. He's currently managing a team of technical program managers at Skyflow, a company dedicated to ensuring that private data is stored and utilized safely and securely. He's previously managed software programs at LinkedIn and Box. So, Steve's title is So Let It Be Written, and that's certainly intriguing, and we'll find out what he means by that. His technical program managers keep technical programs on track. If you want to write good documentation without last minute surprises, if you want to get the information you need when you need it, if you want timely reviews, build a good relationship with your technical program manager. Steve will tell us how tech writers and TPMs work together in the software industry. Okay, take it away, Steve.
Thanks, Richard. I'm going to go ahead. Can I share my screen? Do you know if
I
someone
think you
can?
can, but if you have a trouble, let me know, and we can make
It
you
says
into a
it's,
co-host or something.
that
Yeah,
might have to be, yeah, it says it's disabled for me.
no, now it should be ready.
Okay, I have it now. Just one moment. All right.
Okay.
Can everyone see that there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for having me. Again, my name's Steve Harang. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. Wanted to spend some time definitely this evening talking about technical program management, the dynamic between technical program managers and technical writers, talk a bit about my past experience working with both functions, and have questions along the way, and hope to make it a fun discussion. So I'll start with a little bit of an introduction. So I think you did a nice introduction for me, probably captured most of the key points, but I'll just go over it briefly as well. So I've been working various software companies actually longer than 10 years, so probably 15 years or more, 10 years specifically in program management. Currently work at a company called Skyflow, and I'll talk a bit more about what Skyflow does because it might be a little bit of a foreign concept. And I've worked previously, as mentioned, at LinkedIn, Box, Intuit. I've worked at Dell, some other big companies in the area. So I am a San Francisco Bay Area native, born and raised in Redwood City. Actually live in Fresno, so I moved down to Fresno about 7 months ago. Go back up to the Bay Area quite a bit for work, and kind of missing the Bay Area weather as it starts to get hotter down here. So it's definitely something that's a little different for me. So I will start out here. And again, I want to make sure that if you have questions, comments, feel free to speak up as we go. Definitely chime in. I definitely want to make this interactive as possible. So wanted to start with, what is a technical program manager? So I think most people have heard this terms or heard the term TPM, but just kind of figuring out what is that? What does that function do? Just kind of want to throw it out to the floor. Anyone have any ideas or past experience working with TPMs?
Well, I work for what considers itself a startup, although it's been around for 11 years.
Okay.
And we have two program managers, one who helps shepherd the engineering process and one who helps shepherd the product management process. So I'm guessing that you're going to focus more on the engineering side of things, or you may have a different definition in mind entirely. I don't know, but that's based on my experience.
Got it. Thanks, Janet. I think you hit on a key point that the role can take on a lot of different functions, and the stakeholders can be very different depending on the company as well. At a startup, you tend to kind of work everywhere. So I think it just depends on what the need is. Sometimes at bigger companies, the role is well defined, and you come in and you do a specific thing and you work with a very small subsection. So it just really depends. I tend to work with both. So I work with product and engineering, as well with a bunch of other stakeholders. But That's kind of been, my experience has been varied over the past, but I would say that probably the best definition that I've heard in my time, and I won't take credit for coming up with this, but that TPMs are like the glue that holds projects together. So they're the ones really working with all the different components, all the different teams, making sure that teams are communicating, making sure that things are being delivered on time, staying within budget. So kind of just bring that up there. And, Janet was right there, hit it on the head there, saying that working between product engineering, working with legal, marketing, and pertinent to tonight's topic, working with documentation and technical writers. So it's definitely one of the stakeholders that we work with a lot. What technical program managers tend to do as well is create a lot of process and policy. So they create the ways that teams work and interact together. And they do that for the benefit of all groups so that they can work most efficiently and cohesively together. So that's kind of in a nutshell, I guess, what the function does. The function can look very different depending on what company you're working with, though. So any questions there? I'll pause and just leave some room for questions. No? Okay.
So is it mostly not company wide? It's by team, these policies and procedures?
Yeah, it depends on kind of the group you're working with. So depending on the size of the company, obviously. So to put it in perspective, where I work now is a startup, Skyflow, versus something like LinkedIn that has a ton of different engineering and product teams. So it really depends on that company, but you tend to work within that domain, whatever it is. So it might be 10 different product teams. It might be 5 different product teams. In some really big companies, you get a TPM assigned to every team if they have the resources for that. So it's much like, I think you would also see that technical writers would then get assigned to different groups as well. So they may work with the same team over and over. They may work with a subset of 6 teams. Just depends on how the company is structured. So that's kind of the way that I've seen it done previously. Cool. Okay. So just real briefly to kind of touch on what does Skyflow do? So Skyflow works with privacy and security. So in this day and age, it's a very hot topic. So think of secure information you have about yourself, like your social security number, your credit card number, your date of birth, your address, things that you have to give out to certain companies, but you don't want just anybody coming across these things. So it's really become a hot topic in the last couple of years, and depending on the company that or the country that you operate in, there's different compliance. The company has to be compliant with different policies, and they have to conform. So there's PCI compliance, which has to do with payments. There's PII compliance, which has to do with personally identifiable information like your social security number, and then there's all HIPAA compliance regarding healthcare. So these companies have to be compliant if they want to do business, like let's say in the EU, in the US, Asia, different areas. And so to get up and running, they have to build various infrastructure that enables them to handle that data securely, make sure that only the right folks have access to it. What companies tend to find very quickly is that that's very costly and very time consuming. So it may take a year, 2 years to build a vault to keep these things in place. So what Skyflow does is we specialize specifically on building these vaults for folks. That's all we do all day long. And we can come in and make the data secure. We can keep it in the vault and still give these companies access to the information when they need it, but also limit who has the right, access to the information. So it's kind of what we do in a nutshell. We can help companies get up and running in as fast as 30 days, which is a lot faster than you'll typically find trying to build this yourself, again, as opposed to that 1 year, 2 year upstream battle that you'll go against. So I will just wanted to bring that there so you kind of know the space that I'm currently working in now. So thank you. I'll move on here to kind of the topic. What intrigued me in talking with Richard and wanting to meet with the group here and speak more about it is kind of the written word. So the title of my presentation kind of ties in with this, but I found this quote to be insightful. As a technical communicator, I am an enabler of information, Suyong Qatar. So I found that online, but I've really found this to be true, that technical writers enable end users to do something, right? They enable them to use a product, they enable them to interact with things, or they enable them with questions. They might have questions, and answering those questions, providing information in a timely way. So, in kind of my mind, I was like, well, why is technical documentation important? Again, kind of, this is another quote that I found online, but it's really providing that essential information about a product or service. So helping end users. And in my case, what I've seen a lot is that it can help deflect questions and support inquiries and things like that if you have the right documentation out there and it's provided in a timely manner and it's provided in a very consumable manner. So from my perspective, my past, it's a very important function, something that I always include in the programs that I'm running. So definitely wanted to kind of hit on that because I know it's definitely a very important topic and a top priority for many companies. So I wanted to talk a bit more about the TPM technical writer dynamic. So thinking of interactions, I don't know, Janet, if you can think of anything. Do you work with your TPM on a regular basis? Do you interact? Like, can you think of any examples where you two might work together?
Well, as the product management team is creating, requirements documents and so on, I engage with them on kind of helping to fill out the documentation portion of that. They're figuring out what is the functionality that is needed, and based on what they're saying, I'm trying to figure out what is the documentation that is needed. And then sort of further downstream, when engineering starts doing stuff, then the writers on my team are working with the engineers and the program manager, to figure out how it actually works and get that documented in a, hopefully, that the documentation is done around the same time as the code, so they can all go out together.
Yep. I think you nailed it again. I think getting those things to align is tricky. It's something that we always aim to strive for, but doesn't always happen, and trying to get that together. So I was thinking back of kind of my experience in the ways that I've worked with technical writers in different functions that they've performed. And this is kind of some of the examples that I have. So a lot of it is creating external content for help centers, marketing, different places where end users are going to consume the information. So like what Janet says, if there's a new feature being built, getting the documentation written on time, getting it out to the public at the same time that the feature becomes available. Another interesting one that I've worked on in the past is a public known issues list. So this was at my time at LinkedIn. So a big site like LinkedIn tends to have bugs and different things that might affect users. And it was a priority for our department to get a list out there where consumers could go to that list and say, okay, I'm experiencing this issue. Is it something you know about? And it was a priority for us to get that list as updated as possible, to get the highest contact drivers on that list. And there was reasons for that, right? It helped us deflect support inquiries. It was also a better experience for the end user to let them know, hey, we know about this thing. We know that it's not functioning right. You don't have to write in about it. You can kind of save your time and update folks on when things might be expected to be resolved. So we had very clear goals and KPIs around what kind of deflection do we want to see and what kind of performance did we want to see around that. More recently at Skyflow, a lot of the technical documentation is for use by the developer community. So we're writing articles specifically for engineers and developers to let them know, how do you use our product? So Skyflow is a developer-facing product. So the technical documentation has to be on point. It has to be very clear. It has to be very concise. It has to include everything that developers need to get up and running with this new product that they've purchased. So that's kind of the new interaction I've been working on a lot. And then the last use case would be like in-product help. So as you're using something, little pop-ups come up and say, hey, you want to use this new feature? This is a new thing we have, like ensuring that all the documentation is there and in place for those things there. Any questions so far? I'll pause for a moment there if any of those.
Yeah, I have a comment, I guess I would put it, about the public known issues list.
Yes.
I used to do in a number of different places. I've done release notes, and in the release notes is where we would put that kind of information often.
Yep.
And we would get a lot of feedback, a lot of pushback from engineers about making bugs public and whether, and my view was always, when the customer calls you up and says, I have this terrible bug, and you say, oh yeah, we knew about that. That's not a very reassuring thing. You want, if you know about the bug, you want to tell people about it, and even if it's embarrassing, there are some situations, especially security bugs, where you don't want to talk about it until it's fixed. But generally speaking, you want to tell customers about the issues, and I've had so much conflict with engineering over that issue.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Richard. I've kind of been down that road before as well. It is, to kind of talk a bit more about that particular subject. It's an intriguing one. I think you nailed it when you said that it's a better end user experience if you can tell the users about those things before they have to write in. But there sometimes is a fine line on how much information do you reveal. And then sometimes there's complexities around legality. Are we opening the company up for litigation or some other type of security issues, like you said? So it was, in my particular case, there was a lot of stakeholders involved. So you had to have legal review almost every single issue that was posted. You had to have marketing,
Wow.
product, and just to ensure like a sign off, right? Hey, this is something that we can post for public consumption, right? So I think, in my particular case, we had a very clunky process. So a lot of times it would take like 2 weeks to get something up and posted. And in most cases, the things were resolved by the time you even posted the documentation. So it was kind of worthless, right? So people were not even wanting to generate content because they're like, what's the point? By the time we put this up, it's going to be fixed. So by the end of the process, once I got involved, we trimmed that down to 24 hours. So it became much more concise, much more, efficient in the way that it ran. And it really did provide value at that point where we could get content up very quickly. And we saw the direct impact where we could see how many times these articles were being viewed. We could extrapolate like how many support tickets would we have gotten if we hadn't put this article up. And there was quite a big ROI in getting that program up and running as efficiently as possible. So it's an intriguing use case. I've heard of some companies like Salesforce. I'm not 100% sure they still do this, but I was told that they would just make all of their bugs like public and just like literally take their Jira tickets and flip them to public facing. I think that's kind of scary, but it's kind of a bold way to do it, right? That have total transparency, let customers know exactly what's going on. But I think it's always a little tricky to manage something like that. So it is a case where I can think of where having that tight knit relationship with my technical writing team really came into play there. Like get articles written very quickly, very succinctly, get them up and running. A lot of times throwing just a bunch of different technical jargon from them from different groups. Like it would span the entirety of LinkedIn. So you think of LinkedIn, there's your profile, there's messaging, there's your news stream. There's just so many components to the website. And so the technical writing team, which was small, probably about 3 people, had to be familiar enough to be able to write content about all those different pieces of the company. So a lot of moving pieces, as you can imagine. So that's kind of my background of working with technical writers. I mean, this will continue to evolve as I continue down my career. It's always different ways. We just had a new technical writer join our team at Skyflow. So already been working with him and his team and figuring out the best ways that our departments can work together.
Okay, my question, maybe I missed it, but how do you prepare to do this role, and how is it different from other technical communication roles?
So you're talking specifically, Maria, about the technical program manager role?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, they are quite different career paths. I think that there is overlap between the two in terms of, technical communication, but if it's a path that you're interested in pursuing or learning more about, there's quite a bit of public courses and things that you can find, but it's very much about management of programs, whereas I think technical writing is its own kind of space where you're writing for that public consumption. So if you have more specific questions about like exploring the TPM role, or what exactly you might want to do to break into that field, like we can talk about it a little bit later. Does that sound fair?
That sounds fair.
Okay, great.
Do you,
All right,
do you have an opinion about this PNP organization process?
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting topic as well, Richard. So I've had that question myself, as like, is that something worthwhile? Like, I don't have a PMP certification. I have tend to find that in the world of like software development, PMP is not always the best fit. PMP found, it's generally pretty rigid, like the frameworks are pretty rigid, and folks who have that certification want to come in and do things a very specific way. And that works in different, domains like banking or healthcare, or some areas where they really want to follow those specific patterns. For software companies, they tend to be very agile, right? So you kind of have to adapt to the way things are happening. And I have not tend to see, like, just in my interaction, different teams I've worked with, teams that I've built, like, tend to not be that many PMP certified folks. Not to say that there's not value in it. I just have seen that in the domain that I work tends to not really be as represented as maybe some other areas.
Well, there better be value in it considering what it costs.
It costs a lot, and there's a lot of upkeep as well.
Yeah.
Like you have to maintain your hours, you have to do a certain number of trainings. So I know I still have it in the back of my mind to possibly pursue it one day, just because I think it couldn't hurt. But at the same time, I don't necessarily think it's a barrier to getting into this field if that's something you're interested in, especially in software SaaS realm. I don't think that you necessarily need that certification. I think real world experience is probably more valuable than just having the certification, but that's just my opinion on it.
The PMP exam was modified in the past few years to include more agile concepts. And there's also variations on the PMP now where you can be more of an agile practitioner. So.
Yep. Thanks for that, Sheena. Yeah, I've noticed that myself. So I think they are kind of tweaking it a bit to make it more relevant. But again, still at this stage, I don't think, again, I wouldn't say it would hurt having it. It probably would help in some cases, but it's not a requirement, I think, necessarily to get into this particular role. And like, while we're on the topic, like program management can take on many different shapes and forms as well. So a technical program manager, as you can imagine, is very engineering heavy, but program management can be used in a lot of different applications. So especially like in content writing, you might work as a program manager on a help center team or something, helping those things to move along. And it's not really so engineering centric. So it just kind of depends on the area and depends on kind of, I guess, your preference, right? What do you like working with? So there's a lot of different options for that. Cool. All right, I will move on. So this is kind of the slide that I have about partnerships. So why is it great to have a good partnership with your TPM? So I think Janet talked about this earlier, but go-to-market TPMs are coordinating all these things. So when will the product go live? When is it expecting to ship? Do we have all of our support documentation in place? Do we have all of our public marketing documentation in place? There's a lot of different checkpoints, and if things are not kept on top of, like, things can slip very easily. Or as a technical writer, you may not get the support or information you need at the time you need it to be able to deliver what you need to deliver to the project. So definitely having that tight-knit partnership with a TPM or someone that's doing program management in your space, I would stress having that, knowing who the person is, get to know them well, get to talk to them up front and early about what you're going to need, who you need to talk to. If you're unclear on something, like, I would say voice that, get to have that out there as much as possible. And likewise, the TPM should do their part to get to know you, get to know what your department does, which requirements you have, everything that can help the team work stronger together. There's a lot of coordination that happens, and I would see, kind of just going through this process at my current company, all those things coming into place, having those checks where as soon as a new product feature is talked about and improved, having documentation right there at the beginning so that we can say, do we need documentation for this? Are there any changes that are happening? What tickets do we need to file? What tasks do we need to get in place? Like, even as far as like our documentation team gets involved in naming features or you know, kind of what are we going to call things, and having kind of an approved public name for features. So there's a lot of partnership that happens there. So again, like if you are working with a TPM, get to know them if you haven't already, get to understand the way that they work, highlight things to them. So from on the other side of the fence, I can tell you TPMs are not always aware of like, you know, hey, we need to do this, we need to check this. So make them aware of those things, make it a part of their checklist that they're going through, and help them to understand the best way for your two teams to work well together. I'll pause there. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that particular one? Cool. Okay. All right. So best practices. I think we've already spoken about a few of these, but you know, the first one we talked about it at length. Definitely spend the time developing the relationship. It's going to serve both parties well. So the more time you can put in doing that, getting to know the person in that role is definitely going to help you. Ensure that your team is represented early and often in the conversation. So try to be a part of those kickoff meetings, you know, as you go in for approvals of new product features to be approved by, you know, VPs or whoever it is that's approving. Try to be a part of that. Try to understand, what is this feature? What's changing? What's being worked on? What type of documentation are we going to have to generate for this? The third bullet point is more for the TPM, but again, if you notice these things not being done, maybe suggest it, maybe try to get this done, but regular readiness meetings. So as a feature is getting ready to ship, you know, I try to meet every week, every 2 weeks with all the stakeholders and ensure that everything is happening, everything is on track, to you know, really talk about any issues that might come up, try to mitigate those problems, try to get, in the case of documentation, get folks the information they need, you know, to make this happen. And that's a key one, I think, to really provide visibility to the entire group as to what's happening. And then the other one would be like, look for efficiency gains. So we talked about this earlier, but that public known issues list, like there was a lot of opportunities for us to cut down that time to get things published. So we came up with, you know, distribution lists, things that would ping out new updates to legal, other groups to help them to review things faster, help to get content approved quicker. There's a lot of efficiency gains that can be found if you're having struggles with meeting deadlines or anything like that. Really work with your TPM to figure out, again, efficiency gains that can happen on both sides. And I would also say a key thing that I've noticed, and maybe doesn't always happen, but I think this was talked about by one of the folks on the call here, but make sure that product owners and engineers are being assigned tasks to help you do your job. So if, in my case, it's a very technical documentation that's happening, I can't expect the technical writer to know how to just write it all, right? So that generally we have to assign an engineer who's going to provide the content, and then the technical writer can make it what it needs to be for public consumption. But if they don't have that partnership, if they don't have someone assigned to work with them, a lot of the times we fall behind and we don't have things ready when they need to be ready. So I would say that's the best practice, to try to help your TPM and product manager assign folks that are going to work with you to get delivered what needs to get delivered. And then lastly, I would say ask for help or raise your hand. If something's not happening, if you're not seeing something happen, bring it up. You know, I think it's just a good topic to bring up, talk about it, find a better way for folks to take care of certain things. So those are kind of the best practices I could think of in my time, you know, working with documentation. I'll pause there if anyone has any comments, questions that might have come up.
Well, I have a question about that every 2 weeks cadence.
Yeah.
What length project are you talking about
Yeah, so I think that can vary, right? Depending on the space you're in. I mean, for me, the product cycles are generally delivered quarterly. So every 3 months, they tend to deliver something, multiple features within a quarter. I think as it starts, you may not meet every 2 weeks, but definitely as you get a month, 2 months away, I found it a best practice to just really have those readiness meetings, make sure everybody's on the same page, make sure everybody's aligned. Sometimes we will conduct them virtually over Slack or some other medium. It may not be that we're all jumping on a call, but really just some checkpoint to make sure that everything is kind of moving the way that it should. So in the case of a technical writer, I'm not necessarily saying they would be the ones to coordinate that. That would fall more on the TPM, but I would say if it's not being done in your project, maybe suggest it. Maybe ask, hey, can we do this? Can we get this so everybody understands where the project's at, what we need to do? We can highlight any issues or red flags that come up as well.
So I worked for a company where we had weekly releases.
Got it.
I was just wondering what would change in your best practices if you had to deal with weekly releases?
Yeah, I think if it's a weekly release, I mean, I think that's going to shorten the cycle quite a bit. Your checkpoints would probably be more frequent, right? Maybe every couple of days. I think if it's that tight of a window, I would probably, just my own perspective on it, try to do some type of virtual check-ins, maybe not have to get on a call like every couple of days, but just say, hey, I'm on track, I'm not on track, I need support from this person, that person. Sometimes, TPMs use different tools like Smartsheet, different things to keep track of, what needs to be worked on, what's already completed. So I think it's a kind of a tight window, Richard. Hopefully, I'm not sure what the documentation asks are for weekly releases. Are they more for like release notes or are they for like external facing documentation?
Well, it's everything. It's new features. It's also release notes, bugs and stuff like that. Well, agile teams, of course, they have daily stand-ups and things like that. And I think maybe that's just a different model from what you're talking about here.
Yeah, I think for agile teams, I mean, if it's that much you have to deliver from your side, then maybe joining those daily stand-ups would be helpful just to kind of figure out what's going on. I think in my experience, generally tech writers don't go to everyday stand-ups. Maybe they'd go to one a week to kind of check in, but I think you really have to kind of adapt to the situation that you're working with. So in your case, going daily would probably help to understand like what's happening. Do I have everything I need? Am I going to deliver? You can inform others like if something's not happening the way it should. So, yeah. Awesome. Any other questions?
Yeah, well, just a comment on the topic of assigning tasks.
Yeah.
The situation that, many tech writers have encountered at some point or other is when they're told, oh, the engineers are too busy to talk to you. The engineers are too busy to review the documentation. And so having that good relationship with the program manager means that they can create the task that says, talk to the tech writer about this feature, review the documentation about this feature. And then it goes into, their planning and estimation for their workload. And hopefully you can have a better outcome that way.
Yeah, that's a real problem, especially for contract technical writers, is you often report to somebody who wasn't in on the thing you're documenting and sees their job as to protect the subject matter experts from you. And now the opposite of that, I love to give the example of, I did a job for Williams-Sonoma, and the day I started, I reported to the director of software development, and he gave me a list of names and what their areas were. And he said, here's a list of subject matter experts and their email addresses and what they're expert in. And they have all been told that they have to talk to you. And that was really great. I mean, it made them, and they were all really helpful because the nature of the project was the documentation was almost immediately useful to them. So that it was, but the opposite of that is places where there's a certain amount of chaos and the people you're documenting something where the people who made it were also contract employees and they've left. And so you're kind of reverse engineering this dumb thing. And, and there's one guy left who knows how it works, but you can't get to talk to him. It could be incredibly frustrating.
Yeah. Good point, Bruce. I think I've seen that happen, in various flavors as well. And I agree that, like, especially in a contract role, it's a tough situation to break in and say, or demand time or things like that. But I think as much as possible, try to advocate for somebody who will advocate for you. So if you can talk to a program manager or even an engineering manager, somebody, like you said, that person who gave you the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. Like, you may not get that level of access all the time, but at least get it on somebody's plate where it's like, hey, we need someone to spend time with this group to be able to ensure that we are delivering on all fronts. So I agree that it can be a challenge. Resources are always limited, but I'd say at least if it's not talked about, then it will probably never be addressed as well. So at least try to get it out there, try to see who you can talk to, maybe try different avenues as well. So if one person's not very receptive, see if there's someone else who might be able to do it. I mean, I think, again, it would vary by situation. Product managers should care about the product they're releasing. They should care that the documentation is good. So I would hope that they would allocate people from their teams to work with you to make sure that it's coming out the way that it should. But I think the one thing we all run up against is everyone has competing priorities as well. So there's always that at play. But the more you can talk about it, spend some time kind of figuring out that dynamic or that relationship, it's going to serve you, going forward. So cool. I'll move on here. So moving forward, I think, being that you all are kind of in this field, this was just specific things that I looked at for technical writers, but it looks like there's still a healthy level of jobs open for technical writers. It's still definitely something that's in demand. Remote work has opened up a lot of opportunities, I think, that weren't there before. So really being able to be located anywhere has helped a lot. I think even in my field, I've noticed, the company that I work for doesn't really care where I'm located. So I could move across the country, I could move to another country, it wouldn't matter. So I think it's opened so many doors for folks to have opportunities that maybe they wouldn't have had before. So I think it's a really good time for being, in the tech writing field or program management, whatever it is you're looking for. And I think just kind of general suggestions, and this can be applied to TPM work as well. Like, if you're interested in a particular field or domain, join as many communities as you can. So LinkedIn, there's tons of groups. You can usually find a group for anything. Join societies like as this one here. Network with as many people as you can. Look for mentors that are out there. A lot of folks are willing to mentor and give you their time, or look to be a mentor to someone as well, because I think it's a two-way relationship where you can learn a lot. And I think the last piece for those looking to break into a new field is really look for real world experience. I think, online courses and whatnot can only do so much for you, but to actually have real world experience. And I think for tech writers in particular, like, to even get an opportunity, right? There's startups, there's nonprofits, there's charities, there's different, volunteering opportunities where you can get in there with companies that need something. They need documentation. Almost every company needs documentation. But if you want to get examples of your work, put it out there. And then when you go to apply for the next role, you can say, hey, I did X, Y, Z at these different companies, and really show them, the value of what you can bring. So I think that applies to any role as well, right? If you're interested in TPM or anything like that, I would suggest something similar. But especially for tech writers, it's very much show me an example of what you've done, right? So it's a very specific in this particular role. So I will come to questions, and I know, Maria, you had some questions about program management in particular, but were there any other questions as well that anyone else has at this point? Cool. Okay. So yes, Maria, like on your question there, if you're interested, like, first of all, are you interested in program management? Is that something that
I'm trying to understand where it fits in.
Oh, got it. Okay. So I think, kind of back to the introduction we did of what the role does, I think if you're talking about a contrast between the two roles, generally the program manager,
distinction of the role versus, however, I don't know how long you've been in the field. I guess you talked about being somewhere 10 years ago, I think, or 10 years somewhere.
Yeah.
So I would say maybe you've been in the field about 15 years, which is about double the time that I've been out of the field, so to speak.
Got it.
And so I'm just trying to understand, because code got written, products got released way back when I started in the 70s.
Yep.
And so And I've seen the bigger role I used to have broken down into finer and finer distinct roles within the application development and release. And some of the things you were talking about were things that we did as a matter of course in our product release meetings, or as part of the product release team, for instance, when when I worked at a couple of different software companies. And so I guess I don't see the distinction in what was the need for this role. Was it the person that manages this process? Did it get too complicated? Why is it a specialty is what I guess I'm trying to understand still.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a bit of information out there, like on the history of program management and how it's evolved, but I think it is something that probably from the 70s till now has become more of a niche need, where companies have grown so big, there's so many different moving parts. Like, I think someone used the term on this call, TPM being a shepherd to kind of guide things forward, to just ensure that things are moving forward. It really depends on the company and the role that you're in, but you can do a lot of different tasks, but generally your role is to be there supporting the teams that you're working with. So if it's product engineering, helping them to do their work as best as they can, or helping technical writers get access to the resources that they need. Like, if there's not a person in charge doing that, in my experience, a lot of times these things fall through the cracks. No one picks them up, and then maybe people just assume that somebody else is working on them, but there's not necessarily one person overseeing these things. And a lot of times you may be in charge of one particular domain, but you interact with folks who are working in their domains, and you kind of have to come together and meet, in a scrum of scrum style of meeting where you're reporting on your entire domain to executives or something like that. So that's been my experience, like why the role is needed. I think, it's an in-demand role, TPMs. There's not that many TPMs around. So if you go to companies, you'll see there might be 100 engineers and there might be 2 or 3 TPMs. It tends to be a smaller community, but I think it's a very kind of interesting role. I mean, I don't know if it's something you're interested in, but there's a lot of demand for it out there.
Sounds like
Okay.
one of the things you're saying is it's a protection of, it's protecting teams from management.
Yeah, I don't know if it necessarily is protecting them. I think it's figuring out like how to get them to work better together. But TPMs are also like brutally transparent. So like their job is to be transparent to management when things are not going the way that they should be. So it's really reporting on status, right? So, hey, we're not going to deliver this thing on time. This is the reason why, and these are the things we can do to try to mitigate that. So I think it's there to be like the eyes and ears for leadership teams, but it's also more than that, right? They're there to try to help move things forward as well. So it can be a buffer at times. I think what I've learned over the years is you have to be adaptable, right? You have to read the situation, kind of bring in the things that you tend to do over and over, but you can't, I think that's in line with the PMP conversation. You can't always come in and be very rigid and say it has to be done this way. You kind of have to read the situation and figure out how to work best within that space.
In a way, it's protecting teams from management by helping them to cover their butts and not screw up, and then therefore get heat from management. So if everything's on track, management's going to be happy and nobody needs protecting from anything.
Yeah. And if things go off the rails, it's also being the person that's going to bring that to everyone's attention. So a lot of times, like we do this thing called change management when things don't go as planned, and then you have to be the one to drive that and say, hey, we're not going to release this thing next month. We're going to push it 2 months. What does that mean? What's that going to mean to our customers? What's that going to mean to our company? What is our CEO going to say about that? So you also have to be the one that kind of raises their hand and says, this isn't going the way that it should. Can we either fix it? And if not, what are the implications of it not happening the way that it should? So you can take a lot of accountability for that. I mean, things don't always go perfectly. There's so many moving parts. But yeah, it's an interesting role. I feel like I'm learning something new every day. So I don't think it's something where you feel like you just master it. And once you've done it, yeah, I can just go and do it. I think there's something new every day. And I think, especially like working at a startup, you wear so many different hats as well, figuring out different things that, at a bigger company, you tend to come in and you're told like the job is done this way and these are our processes, and you might have a little bit of autonomy on how to create new processes, but for the most part, the job has been set up for you. Whereas at a smaller company, you are really defining the way that the job will be done. Cool. Any other questions? Great. Well, I appreciate you having me. Really exciting to be here and to speak about this topic. If you have any other further questions in the future, you can find me on LinkedIn. I still use LinkedIn quite regularly, maybe even more than when I was working there. So feel free
If
to
this
reach
were
out.
an in-person meeting, at this point, I would come up and present you with our speaker gift, which is the coveted STC Berkeley chapter mug.
Oh, awesome.
The
Awesome.
Berkeley chapter no longer exists. It's now part of a larger SF Bay chapter, but we still have the mug, and some of our procedures have broken down, but we will try to get you this. It will help if Richard Ewing has your contact information, your mailing address, I guess, your shipping address, and
Yeah,
we'll get you that.
He should have it. I'll definitely get it to him if he doesn't, and I can bother him as well. I've known Richard for a long time, so I will pester him about that. So
okay, well, thank you very much. We really appreciated that.
thank you. Appreciate you having me. Take care.
All right, so at this point, I'm going to stop the recording, and then if anybody else wants to, no, that's not what I want.